Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me, as always, across the way, Mr. Jeff Abercrombie. Jeff, another week of NFL is completing up tonight as the Broncos face the Chargers. Another week of college football season is in the books. How are you doing this evening?
Well, I was very disappointed with San Francisco's showing, but week 6 was topsy-turvy all over the place. And I mean, you sound pretty good for the play going through your house, but you better feel really good with I think the Giants are tied for the second best record in the NFC, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, 5-1, just finding ways to win games. I mean, I don't want to look ahead of myself, but 4 very winnable games on the neck for the next month against teams that, they could, easily, not easily, because I don't think anything will come easily to the Giants, but they definitely could win the next couple games. So like it's definitely got the making of an interesting year and not what anybody as a Giants fan was expected. So I'm just enjoying the ride. Maybe we can get Kadarius Toney on the football field at some point, which would kind of really aid in their offense. But we'll
Yeah,
talk
we
about
haven't
the
seen their ceiling yet.
No, we haven't. And there's a lot, Wan'Dale came back this week, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. I think he's going to create some buzz down the stretch of the NFL, second half of the NFL year. But we'll get to some NFL talk. Why don't we jump right into the 2023 NFL Draft Stock Report for this week? I think we witnessed we'll see, college football pulls off these miracle games and amazing games on a regular, it feels like. But it's possible we start a game of the year on Saturday with that Tennessee-Alabama game. We'll see if anything can top that. I'm not sure they're not still partying in Tennessee. My biggest question when I watched the end of that game is, where are the field goal posts right now? The last I knew, they got them out of the stadium, and I like so many questions in my mind of just where do they end up? Like, who's responsible for then finding these field goal posts and cleaning them? But and like doing whatever they're supposed to do with them. But it was an amazing game. We'll get into it. So why don't you kind of get us going? Where do you kind of want to start maybe with the stock report?
We'll start with the goalpost because the university started a GoFundMe to get them out of the river or something like that. So that's where they're at. Well, I mean, you brought it up top. We usually start at the quarterbacks. There's 2 that you wanted to talk about. It's from this game. It's Bryce Young and Hendon Hooker, right? So Bryce Young, I mean, I thought he started kind of slow. We saw this, a couple weeks ago as well. But, 455 yards, 2 touchdowns by the end of it, 50 pass attempts. But on the other side, you had Hendon Hooker leading Tennessee to victory, the upset over Alabama. He had 21 of 30, 385 yards, 5 touchdowns, a pick and some work in on the ground. I think we kind of know what Bryce Young is, but if there's some point that you want to go into a little bit deeper that you saw him in this game, I'd love to hear what you're thinking of. But let me just lead this off with Hendon Hooker. Like, has he jumped Will Levis as sort of the third quarterback in this class? What's his ceiling, as far as draft capital goes?
Yeah, so I'll start there with Hooker, and then I'll circle back and finish up with Bryce Young as well. The thing with Hooker is we don't know how the NFL is going to view the whole age thing, right? 25 years old by the time he would step foot. I don't think they're going to look at it like after the Brandon Weeden debacle. Like, I don't think NFL teams are going to look at him and think that he can't be a starting quarterback at the next level, like a guy that we invest somewhat decent draft capital in because of his age. I think, what he's doing this year in the SEC, and who's to say Tennessee's not riding some magical ride this year where we're going to see them face Georgia and we're going to see him in more big games. And if he continues to shine in those games, I think people are going to overlook the age thing, especially for quarterbacks, because it's not like quarterbacks hit a wall at 28 or 29 or anything. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see, certain teams may knock that or dock it a little bit more than other teams. And then does that move the needle a little bit? I keep coming back to, I think Will Levis has been good this year. I don't think he's been exceptional. I don't think he's been great. But then you hear people like who do have sources and, like I mentioned, Jordan Renan on the Giants podcast, and my guess is his sources are probably the draft people at ESPN. But McShay and Kuiper, like those people have ears to the ground. They hear things, right? And I think it was you brought up a couple of weeks ago that the CBS Sports people had Will Levis as like number one in their mock draft. So like I could see a scenario where I have Hooker ahead of Levis. But if people are thinking that Levis could legitimately be the first pick in the draft, and like those are coming from some reputable sources, I have a hard time thinking that that's where it's going to end up. Whether or not, when I do a deep dive on Hendon Hooker, I kind of see where I put him. Is he third? Is he fourth? Is he fifth? Like, that's, I think, to be determined for me. But when you look at Hooker, I know it's the age thing. I'm pretty sure there was some off the field stuff or some character stuff that maybe was also knocking him. I don't know enough about that to speak on it in any way, shape, or form. But when you just watch him on the football field, and we've talked about this briefly, and we are going to do a full deep dive sooner rather than later on Hendon Hooker, he's got the size, he's got the frame, he's got the athleticism, he's got the ability to make plays with his legs and his arm. He can buy time in the pocket. I think he does a pretty good job of keeping his eyes upfield as he starts to move. Like in his ball placement this year has dramatically impressed compared to some of the questions that were there prior to this year, the accuracy. So, I mean, for him, it's just like skyrocketing his value, and more games like that against tough SEC opponents. It's going to be hard not to catapult him and see a team taking him in the first round. And then Bryce Young, yeah, he started out slow in that game. But I do think we also saw the best of Bryce Young in that game in terms of his creativity, in terms of making things happen. Yes, the size is always going to be a detriment, but he finds a way to navigate the pocket. He's like a problem solver / like we talk about problem solving all the time. Like Bryce Young is one of the better problem solving quarterbacks I feel like I've seen over the last handful of years. Even at his height and stuff in terms of at times maybe balls being batted down. He just does such a good job of buying time, sliding, understanding like how to change the velocity of the throws. So I thought it was while they got the loss, I watched that game and thought to myself, this is why a team's going to fall in love with Bryce Young, what he can bring to the table. He doesn't check all the boxes in terms of the physical traits, but I think in terms of the quarterbacking skills, a team's gonna look at him and think that he could be their guy, their point guard, their leader who kind of makes the whole, kind of the engine to their offense that they want to run, especially if it's like up tempo, spread the field, get it out quick. I think that could be Bryce Young. So I walked away with that game thinking that the traits that we like about Bryce Young, they're still there. They're very high, even in a year where things have not came as easy to Alabama without those elite skill players. I think the only reason why they've been even where they have been is because at times Bryce Young just kind of wills them to keep that offense being as productive as it is, even though they don't have the horses like they usually have.
Yeah, and I think that's the crazy part, because it seems crazy to say Alabama is sort of a little bit bare at the cupboard, especially when you say in reference to, Ohio State, if we're doing, the Young Stroud comparison, right? Stroud has talented pass catchers getting separation at every level of the field. It's easy. Everything on Ohio State is easy. And that's kind of what you're used to seeing at Alabama, but none of these receivers have really stepped up in any meaningful way. And so it just makes the problems that Young is solving more difficult, which, is sort of that catch-22. Okay, maybe he doesn't have, otherworldly production on the level that, you'd see with like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, just on that magical season, right? I mean, with Alabama and their receivers, it just seems kind of crazy that, he's able to put up almost 500 yards and, Jermaine Burton is only getting like 50 of them. And he's sort of the highlight name of the receiving core at the moment. I mean, we have a couple underclassmen there, but again, nobody's really like stepped up in where you could say, oh, that's a top 10 receiver in college football right now. Right. And so I just think that's, crazy. For Hooker, I mean, I really, I really have to get deep, strong eyes on him. You can't ignore. I mean, we've talked about him for a couple weeks already, and so we're not ignoring him. But when you come out and you beat Alabama, and there's half of the NFL is in attendance, you're making waves. I wouldn't be surprised if what we see, there was still a lot of love for Sam Howell last year at this point, right? Things like that. The landscape can really shake up, and that's the type of performance that's going to do it, right? Levis hasn't done that at all this year. I mean, he's played pretty well at times, and he's got some good plays on film and beautiful deep ball, etc. But what Hendon Hooker just did last weekend, is it put every draft Nick on alert. I mean, most draft Nicks probably were there, but the NFL is on alert. There's a reason half the NFL was at that game. So let me just run down and why don't we take it to a couple pass catchers? And I will highlight first that Booty got over 100 yards for the first time this season. That's great to see. Hopefully, like Quentin Johnston, this is signs of more happening, more integration in the offense. And speaking of Johnston, he hit 8 catches for 180 yards and a touchdown. TCU upsetting Oklahoma State, and making a serious threat for the championship, for the conference championship there. But I wanted to. We've talked about Xavier Hutchinson as like a guy on our watch list, somebody to keep an eye on, guy who's producing. I really wanted to center in on him just a little bit. So 10 catches, 154 yards this past weekend. And he hasn't had a single game this year under 8 catches. And he hasn't had a single game under 84 receiving yards. I mean, he is the most consistent producer in college football at the wide receiver position to date. Phenomenal. So I had to get eyes on him. Iowa State didn't quite pull off the upset there on Texas, but Hutchinson was a big part of their effort, that getting them close. So I went in and looked in it, and so he is getting schemed up a little bit. It's kind of to be expected when this player's pretty much the entire engine of your offense. When I saw him, it's really hard on the broadcast angle to get some nuance, but he was always kind of in a soft spot of the zone. He was always attacking the ball with his hands away from his frame. Really seemed, he had a couple drops that seemed a little weird, but I think that's more of a focus issue because the way he attacked the ball, I think he's going to be a pretty reliable hands pass catcher at the NFL level. He was always tending to make contested catches though, and that's always impressive. But it's not the all 22 tape; it's the broadcast angle. But what you don't see, that separation, you're wondering, does he? Can he do that? Can he do that at an NFL level? And that's a big question. There was one rep that the angle was sort of zoomed out enough where you could just see him getting jammed at the line and had no solution to kind of get off this DB. So there's potentially some current concerns there, and it's going to be an interesting profile because he's one of the more productive wide receivers this year. But I think it'll be really interesting to see from a film perspective, where does he end up slotting into the rankings? Because again, there's production and then there's traits. And I think the traits are what lets you become completely explosive. Like we saw Jamar Chase, a Quentin Johnston 180-yard game. Do you have anything to add on the pass catchers there?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say is I do think this is going to be a weird year that you're not going to see a lot of the high level traits guys that we've been talking about for a long time aren't going to have gaudy stats unless they really have a super strong finish to the year, right? If all of a sudden Quentin Johnston starts dropping, 150 a game, then sure. But I don't see a scenario where Kayshon Boutte is going to have some great statistical season, right? And if at some point does he shut it down? Like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, right? Like, even if LSU makes some type of bowl game, I don't think we'll see, Boutte playing in that bowl game. We'll see about some of these other guys. So it's going to be one of those things that you're going to have like the analytical people, like the people like, you're just talking about, like Hutchinson's going to have a tremendous market share, right? Like there's no doubt about it. Like the analytics is going to show, elite level production, but the traits I think are going to be whether or not, and I don't know, I don't want to speak on him enough because I haven't put him through enough of a deep dive to really say where he falls with his traits compared to some of the other guys. Obviously, I've seen him. He's been very productive. The stats are fantastic. The consistency is fantastic. But where he's going to fall is going to be interesting because a lot of the wide receiver drafting, I think this upcoming draft is going to be about traits. It's going to be about how you fit with the offense, right? We've already talked about, we know there's going to be a ton of great slot wide receivers. And it's like, where do you pick these slot guys? Because there's going to be different levels of guys going in round 1, round 2, round 3, somewhere early on day 3. Where do you feel comfortable? And then do some of these other guys develop that people feel comfortable about them being traditional X wide receivers? Like, George Pickett on talent alone should have been a round 1 pick. He falls to day 2. Could that happen with Kayshon Boutte? I don't think so, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility either. And then we see where, is Burden even going to declare? I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. We've seen guys go back to Alabama who were way better statistically and traits wise than Jermaine Burden. So I don't think he's even a lock to declare anymore. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think the wide receiver group is going to be the one that has the most variance in terms of people's ranks. I think it's going to be the one that changes the most between who we're talking about as being the top names now compared to in April. And it's going to be really fun because I don't usually think wide receiver, we see that kind of variance. Usually by the middle of the college football season, Jameson Williams by now last year was emerging, right? We were talking about him already. We knew he was headed, especially at Alabama. We knew he was headed towards round 1. But all the other guys were the usual suspects, right? We knew Garrett Wilson. We knew Drake London. We knew, Jahad Dotson. We maybe didn't know if he could get to first round, but we knew he was a big time player, right? And the rest of the group, Chris Olave, like all those guys who went, early on, we were expecting that. I feel like there's a lot more uncertainty about this group of wide receivers. And I feel like it's going to take the rest of the season and the pre-draft process, the Senior Bowl, the combine to kind of sort it out. And you're going to see more variance, similar to how I thought we saw a tremendous amount of variance in the running back ranks last year between evaluators and a lot of people we trust. I feel like we're going to see a lot of variance in the wide receivers, even in like people's like top 5, top 10s. I feel like we're going to see a lot of variance. So you might start seeing guys like Hutchinson and other people who we weren't talking about, in early September, late August. Those guys have the ability, I think, in this draft class to emerge. Some people, Charlie Jones, another guy that, who's really having a strong year. Different guys are going to jump up and I think throw themselves into the mix to maybe be in the day 2 mix, the top 50 mix. And we don't usually see that too often at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying there. I think it's fascinating. There's no bulletproof profiles at the wide receiver at the moment. So, let's just kind of go adjacent and hit the pass catchers because our APB got a hit on it. We got an Arik Gilbert sighting this weekend. Got a touchdown, 2 for 16. Nothing fancy, but hey, out there with some catches. That's great. But not to be outdone, Dalton Kincaid. So 15 catches, 217 yards, a touchdown, absolutely unstoppable, just dominating. And, Utah upsets USC in a big match this weekend, in large part to Dalton Kincaid. So I think I saw somewhere that Brent Keat at least was out for this game, maybe out for a while. And it gives us Kincaid a little bit of room to show his own stuff. But Paul, is there anything else left that you want to say about Kincaid? Because I'm just excited that there's something else to be a little bit excited about for this tight end draft class, because it had been pretty boring for a while.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Kincaid falls into that thing. You love to see the production, right? Because sometimes we just don't see a lot of college tight end production. And when I watch Kincaid, I feel like you do get similar vibes to his teammate, who I did like in Keith also. I think he's got a little bit more to the frame a little bit than maybe like his teammate. But we've seen guys like we saw a couple years ago, Kylan Granson I think he went either early fourth or late third. We saw Dalton Keene from Virginia Tech, right? He didn't pan out for New England, but he went in the third round. So I think a guy like Kincaid, I don't think he's going to push into, like, think about last year, like Trey McBride fell to like pretty late into the round 2, most of the tight ends. I don't think Kincaid's going in the first 2 rounds, but he could easily push himself into the mix to be a top 5 tight end in this class. It could be, a pick what you need, right? Like, no one's thinking about the other Georgia guy, Darnell Washington, as a guy who could go early, but he's a really, really good blocker, like a borderline great college tight end blocker. And he's very athletic with probably some untapped athleticism and upside that he could easily push his way into like the top 5 mix, because besides Michael Mayer, it's and Laporta, I feel pretty comfortable is going to be somewhere in that top 5 mix. But like, I know I like Tucker Kraft, but he's coming from a small school. What does the NFL think of him? Jaheim Bell really hasn't had a year that I thought people expected him to. So a guy like Kincaid can push himself into the mix. I do think by the time the dust settles, we'll get a couple guys that we will feel comfortable going somewhere on day 2 after Mayer probably goes in round 1. Arik Gilbert still being the wild card. He could still go, anywhere from early round 2 to somewhere on day 3 based on his athleticism and, who knows what the NFL is going to think of him. But I think Kincaid, when you see a tight end put up that production in that game, right? That was a big game. That wasn't coming against some team that, isn't a legit contender. It does raise the eyebrows. And for a tight end, when you put a performance like that, I think that does open up some eyes because you just don't see games like that from tight ends at the college level, right? So I think Kincaid's an interesting prospect. If I was going to guess right now, my guess is I still think he probably ends up going early day 3, but I do think he could theoretically push himself into the mix to be considered somewhere in round 3. But I could see this year it being a little bit of more of a early day 3 tight end range than last year. We had that little mini run, late in day 2. I'm not sure we get like 5 or 6 guys in the first 3 rounds. I could see a little bit less this year, and maybe then Kincaid is somewhere early on day 3. But, if teams are looking for, pass catchers, at the tight end position, he offers an intriguing skill set that some teams might think that he fits well with what they have currently on the roster.
Yeah, it was clearly his best game. And again, just from the highlights, he was pretty much unstoppable, to help Utah's passing attack there. Unless, let me just do, we sometimes do that 2-minute drill rapid fire. The running backs are the running backs. There's nothing entirely new there. We saw a good game from Tank Bigsby. It's always something nice to see, right? Showing he still has it a little bit, 21, 79 and 2, it's, with Auburn all, kind of being a little bit of a train wreck, seeing a good game come up here and there for Bigsby is always nice to see. Chris Rodriguez, a name I highlighted here. I think it's only his second game back from suspension or something, but 30 for 196 and 2 again in that big Kentucky attack there. If there's anything you want to kind of dig into, I'm happy to kind of, go ahead and give ourselves a little bit more time for the NFL side of things too, after hitting the Devy watch list. Do you have anything that, from a running back that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is, listen, Chris Rodriguez is a guy that me and you talked about. I personally like him better than a guy like Zach Charbonnet. I think that's a little bit hot take-ish in terms of what's out there in terms of the Devy community. But I do like Rodriguez as a guy who I think would be an intriguing early day 3 pick, similar to where Dameon Pierce went, similar to where I know Brian Robinson snuck in right at the end of round 3, but similar to how a team viewed Brian Robinson. I like Rodriguez for that kind of role. So I'm intrigued by him. It was really nice to see Tank Bigsby, especially against Ole Miss. He was really that Auburn offense. So I think that kind of game re-elevates Tank Bigsby stock a little bit as a guy that, warrants going somewhere on day 2 because of his skill set. And then while Quinshon Judkins continued to impress, so did Zach Evans this past week. Finally had, a big game after a couple, lackluster games over the last couple of weeks. Maybe it was injury related, maybe it was Junkids related, maybe it was a combination of both. But 21 carries, 136 yards, and a touchdown in a big win, and an impressive performance for Zach Evans there. So I thought Evans' performance and Bigsby, and I'll throw Arik Gray into the mix, who continues to really produce this year for that Oklahoma team. Those are guys that I think were, unlike the wide receivers where things are kind of up for grabs, I feel like the running backs are kind of solidifying, holding steady in terms of the guys that we thought were going to be the top guys. I think a lot of people's top 8, top 10s in the running backs will have the same names and then juggle the order, where I don't think that's going to be the case at the wide receivers. I think the running backs have done a pretty good job, the top guys, at producing this year. And I think those are going to be in most people's, like, pick a number, top 6, top 8, top 10. I think you're going to see a lot of similarity in terms of the names, because I think most of the running backs have lived up to, what we expected and what the draft community and Devy community expected. Most of them have lived up to the billing this year, or they're starting to get it going, like Zach Evans, hopefully, and Tank Bigsby. I don't think there's as much uncertainty at the running back position as at the wide receiver.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, definitely on your top tier, and maybe with the names, but you might have to extend that all the way down to 15, 16. Yeah, I mean, it's a giant middle class at the running back position, vying for a very limited amount of day 2 draft capital, right? We know not 15 running backs are not going to go in day 2, and I wouldn't be surprised if I had a dozen or plus graded that, I think worthwhile of that, especially with a guy like Chris Rodriguez, who might just be like a souped up Jerome Ford. Arik Gray, again, we should have been down there because he had a big game, but part of the reason I'm still so hesitant to highlight him significantly is because I don't know if he's doing enough, to really climb my ranks. So the production is one thing, but it's still coming in, a lot of open field, and Oklahoma's doing a good job there, scheming him out to that. But, it's still one of those ones where I'm not sure how well that's going to translate onto the NFL field. And so I'd still just have major concerns there. I don't know if you want to.
And I will say, I think Gray's going to be more of a guy that is firmly day 3. I don't think we're looking at a day 2 grade on Arik Gray. I think what NFL teams will like about him is he's got a good athletic profile. He's a guy who can produce in the run game, be like a space player in terms of his running, but also is a good pass catcher. So I think a team will be intrigued by that, maybe make him a kick returner as well as a pass catching running back, a space back. So I think teams will look at him, I'll just throw this out there because I mentioned his name before. But I think a team like the Texans, who have Dameon Pierce, but don't really have anything else, right? Rex Burkhead, a replaceable player. I could see a team who, or maybe even Washington if they were to, but they have McKissick, so maybe it's a bad example there. But a team like we'll say Houston, right? If Dameon Pierce is going to be the guy that they think is their lead guy for the short term here, Arik Gray is a good compliment to draft him in round 4 or round 5 as a guy who can do things differently than Dameon Pierce. He's a better pass catcher. He's a better player in space. He can make people miss, a little bit more athletic ability, but not going to be a guy who could be the bell guy, not a great interior runner. So I think a team will like him, but I'm not putting him in that top 8 mix. My guess is I'll have a day 3 grade on him in terms of where I think he'll be drafted and probably should be drafted, because I don't think he's that guy you're going to look at as like a focal point of an offense. I think he can be a role player in an offense and be a role in a backfield more than the guy who could be like one of the main offensive weapons in terms of how an offense views him.
Yeah, if you want to put him in like a Travis Etienne style role, right? With a good complement like James Conner. I mean, obviously, you don't want to put round 1 draft capital for a guy who's, not really a focal point of your offense, unless you're Jacksonville. So I think that's way more appropriate, right? Let me run through the Devy Slant just as sort of like a quick hits, right? One thing to note, Drew Allar, hyped quarterback in the 2025 class. He came in relief for Sean Clifford during the Penn State-Michigan game, a little bit of a blowout, but, maybe we see, Penn State realize that their season's on the cusp of kind of being lost a little bit. I mean, they'll still have bowls to fight for and everything, but they have a future to look forward to in Drew Allar. So we might see a shift there. Devin Neal is just a guy I've been keeping my eye on. Obviously, he's a big name in the community there, but 12 for 84 and 1. That's kind of a stat line he's had over the last few weeks. So he's playing out there. And Mario Williams, 145 yards for USC. He's emerging as sort of the number 2. But I just want to do a little bit of a highlight profile on the Arizona pass catchers, because we had Dorian Singer that I mentioned a little bit last week. He's still a guy I'm watching, 24 class. Jacob Cowing in this class. And then we just had a breakout for Tet Mcmillan, who's the true freshman who had 7 catches, 132 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's kind of second in his class in receiving yards. And it's something, again, we talk about, Evan Stewart and, having big games as true freshmen as something that we care about and pay attention to. So I think, Tet Mcmillan is one of those names you've got to put on your radar. And then lastly, just one quick, final drive by here with Quinn Ewers. 17 of 26, 170 yards, 3 touchdowns. Like, it's been, just a few games for him, but the more he strings together, the more he's confirming priors and the more he's rising up in the eyes of people grading out that 2024 class, which is looking really good, right? Drake May, Caleb Williams, Ewers is really making room for himself to be considered there. You especially going to be excited going into next year.
And I'll just jump in right there because you mentioned Ewers, right? We talked about this in the past, right? We know Ewers, May, and Caleb aren't eligible to that 2024 class. And if some of the guys we expected to maybe be 2023 guys go back and ever find their ceiling, Van Dyke, Anthony Richardson, all of a sudden now you're talking about, where we thought this was going to be a really strong quarterback class. Maybe we're just looking at Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and then what people want to do with Will Levis and Hendon Hooker. All of a sudden it could be next year with Williams and May and Ewers. And if Van Dyke and Richardson find their upside and their ceiling, if they go back to school, all of a sudden that could be a much stronger class. So I think it can go either way. I think it depends on, how the second half of the year plays out for some of these toolsy developmental prospects of whether or not they go back, they go in. I think you can make the case that, Young and Stroud are right there with any two you're going to say for the following year, but then we don't know what else 2023 is going to bring yet right now. Like if the league is super high on Will Levis and they really think he's on the level of Young and Stroud, well, and that's a third guy who's going to be in the mix high, but we already think we know that 3 are going to be pretty high, with Ewers, Drake May, and Caleb Williams probably in that 2024 class. But as we've seen in the past, right, by the time they get to that spot, a lot of things can change, right? We start with Spencer Rattler, we start with Sam Howell. So what we think we know right now, or what we think we might know about that 2024 class, could easily spin out a year from now. It can look very differently, which is part of the beauty of college football. It's part of the beauty of year round, kind of like doing what we do here at Saturday to Sunday, to see the ebbs and flows of these. Nothing is like, we always say, growth is not linear. It doesn't just keep going naturally, from one game to the next. There's bumps, there's ups, there's downs. So it'll be fun to kind of follow these guys and kind of see where this plays out. Let's spin this right over to the NFL side of things, and we'll hit on a little bit of a rookie report for week 6 of the NFL season. Guys that I really wanted to talk about: Kenneth Walker in his first game as the lead ball carrier with, Rashad Penny, unfortunately, out for the year. 21 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown. Also chipped in with 2 catches. 23 touches. Seattle's playing much better than I think anybody expected them to, including, even though their defenses at times have been bad this past week, they played pretty well. Maybe it was more the Cardinals, lackluster offense. But Kenneth Walker is going to be a guy, or Ken Walker, if that's what he goes by now. He's going to be a guy that is going to see heavy workload this year, and where year one was always kind of up for debate in terms of how much value he would have as a rookie, I think he's going to end up being an RB2. And I think the sky is really high for where we should have him ranked moving forward. Listen, I personally like Kenneth Walker more coming out of college than I like Javonte Williams. And I wasn't as bullish as some people who bumped Javonte Williams right to the top, tippy top of dynasty rankings. But I will say, if that's what people do with young running backs, I'm not sure that Kenneth Walker shouldn't be by the time this offseason rolls around in people's top 6, top 8s, top 10s, if that's what they were doing with Javonte Williams last year. They have Lockett and Metcalf there. My guess is eventually there'll be a different quarterback, but even if we just take the quarterback situation out of it for right now, I don't think Javonte Williams is this clear, better runner than Kenneth Walker. I actually, like I said, I preferred Walker slightly coming out of college. I think he can handle a heavier workload. We've never seen Javonte Williams handle a heavy workload. So I think Kenneth Walker, ceiling really high on Kenneth Walker moving forward. I would want him on my teams, and I'd pay a pretty penny to get him, because I think he could be a functional pass catcher as well. Like, I don't think he's going to be, an integral part, but I think he's fine. I think he could be I think he could be Derrick Henry, who we've seen, be fine when they've used him in certain ways. I don't think he's going to be Nick Chubb, where he never gets utilized. So I thought it was impressive. And then
Let me
Brian
jump in right there too,
Yeah.
just because, I think I've got a little bit to elaborate on that. And, Ken Walker was my guy ever since I got some eyes on him at Michigan State, to start last year. Right. And then that's what started our Devy deep dive, honestly, was our group chat about, what is this Walker kid? Is he for real? And there's highlights now. You could see it. He's showing some movement skills that he showed at Michigan State, where he's instantly transitioning from downhill to a lateral movement in one plant of a foot. And it's not even a jump stop or a jump cut or anything. Just plant the foot, and he's making NFL defenders look absolutely ridiculous. They can't figure out where he's going to be, where he's going. It's phenomenal. And, the biggest question on him was like, oh, okay, well, there's Seattle, and there's maybe he's, not the pass catcher, right? Everybody thought Javonte is going to be this, big pass catcher for Denver and stuff too. Well, Ken Walker's first role when Penny was healthy was actually coming in a bit on third down and like helping out on third down, down in distance. And, he's improved as a pass blocker. He's actually pretty reliable there. So, I think he can play a true workhorse 3-down role for Seattle. And that's how he was used this last week. So possibly, if that's what we see moving forward, very possibly he could be a top 10 dynasty running back. I mean, he already on faith was in my top 15 and sort of the last name in that tier 2, where we have big but older producers like Kamara or Dalvin Cook or Aaron Jones. And he was kind of the last name in there that, I had to make sure that he got his due. And where he shuffles within that tier and within that rank, I think is up for debate depending on what you need. But phenomenal. And I just love to see when the way a college player wins at the college level transitions immediately to the NFL level, and it just all your doubts of, can he carry that over to stiffer competition, to the next level? All of those doubts just go away, because you're like, oh, that's exactly how good he looked on the college field. He's looking that good on an NFL field. This is that guy. He's that guy. He can do it. He's going to be productive. He's going to be a good player.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing that in glimpses, and it just shows you, though, right? Which is why dynasty rankings are truly a almost impossible task, because before the season started, almost everybody probably had Najee Harris in their top 4 running backs, top 5. Would you say that's a pretty safe assumption? Most people had him in their top 5 before the season completely started. I would say most people probably had him in their top 5s.
I had him at 8, but
for running backs.
Yeah, I think around there.
Okay, so even if we say top 8, even if we say most people had him in their top 8, like right now we're only 6 weeks into the NFL season. I think for anybody to have watched the NFL this year, I don't think anybody, if they redo their updates, would have Najee Harris ahead of Kenneth Walker? Nobody. And I like Najee Harris coming out, but he just looks slow. Part of it's the offensive line in Pittsburgh, I get, but his production last year was a lot of volume based. And I think Kenneth Walker is just a more explosive player. I'm telling you, I think people who are all in on Javonte Williams should be just as much all in on Kenneth Walker. And I think Kenneth Walker has shown the ability to be a bell cow. Javonte Williams, that is more in theory that we have never seen yet. We didn't see it at UNC. We didn't see it last year for Denver, and there were no inclination that we were going to see it this year in Denver either. But Kenneth Walker in his first game as the guy, 23 touches, right? Besides that one game where maybe Javonte Williams caught those like 11 passes, I don't think Javonte Williams probably has had a game where, he handled 23 touches, or maybe a game if Melvin Gordon was out last year or got injured. So stock up on Kenneth Walker. I think he's a guy that is going to be quickly in most people's top 10 dynasty running back ranks, and well-deservingly for that. Brian Robinson took the starting job last Thursday night from Antonio Gibson. 17 carries, 60 yards, and a touchdown. This is my take on Brian Robinson. I liked him as a player. I think he's got a little bit more juice for a big guy than you would. I think he's got quicker feet than you might think. Late third-round pick. I kind of feel like Brian Robinson, Dameon Pierce, I think they could be good fantasy pieces as RB2s in that RB16 to RB22 range-ish or so. If they're getting heavy workload, they're going to be a little game script dependent. They're going to be a little touchdown dependent. And they also don't have that high-level draft capital that makes you feel a little bit safer for dynasty. But if Washington could ever figure out the quarterback situation, they got some good playmakers there. I'd prefer Pierce to Robinson based on situation a little bit. But I think Brian Robinson, I think he's going to be their guy. I think Antonio Gibson, we talked about him last week, so we don't have to get into him again. I think Antonio Gibson's out, right? I don't think he has much of a long-term role there with Washington. I think he's more of a complementary player. They want Robinson. I mean, the fact that he just came back from what he came back from, and by the second game he was active, he was their clear-cut starter, I think speaks volumes on either how much they like him, how much they don't like, Antonio Gibson. So I think that's something to keep a close eye on. Do you have any thoughts on Brian Robinson before we touch upon a couple pass catchers?
Oh, I think you encapsulated it really well. I'm just excited. I mean, he came back from, just that freak, I mean, you never want to see somebody, in a victim like that. But I'm glad, I didn't know how serious it would or wouldn't be. There wasn't a lot of information out there about what its potential impact was. And I'm just grateful that it doesn't look like it's going to be just a little blip to start the career, and it's already behind him is what it looks like. So thankful for that. Let's run through it, and we'll do a quick highlight on, 3 pass catchers here. Tyquan Thornton for New England here. He got it done on both the ground and through the air, contributing kind of both ways, all the way through the phases, about 50 yards only, but 2 touchdowns. So big game there. Wan'Dale Robinson comes in. He only got 14 snaps, so eased into it, but he was targeted heavily when he was there. So three targets on his limited snaps, 37 yards, a touchdown. Maybe even more impressive for a rookie. Daniel Bellinger's out there, and he's out there every play, and he's a pretty integral pass catching outlet for Daniel Jones. 5 catches, 38 yards, 1 touchdown. We brought it up earlier. Your Giants are 5-1. Paul, I'm just going to let you have the floor here.
Well, for Daniel Ballinger, like realistic expectations we got to put on Daniel Ballinger, as good as he's been. It's impressive for any 4th round player to become an instant starter. It was mostly done out of necessity, but he is ran with that opportunity. He's a integral part of their red zone offense, partially because they're lacking a lot of other playmakers for sure. But what I will say about a guy like Daniel Bellinger is he's never going to be a top 10, like top 6, top 8 type tight end. He's never going to be even in that second tier where we have guys like Goddard and Hawkinson and Freiermuth. But he could develop into, I don't think, yes, Daniel Jones is not Josh Allen. We know that, but we understand that it's the same scheme. It's a similar scheme. As much as people were excited about Dawson Knox, there could come a time in New York that people are as excited about the Giants offense if they find the right quarterback down the line, that I do think Bellinger could be a guy who's a tight end too for now, who plays a lot on the field a lot with upside, right? He was one of those guys that had sneaky athletic testing at the combine. We didn't really expect that because San Diego State asked him to block so much. So I do think he's a guy that, like, if you tell me in a couple years people view him in fantasy like they kind of viewed Dawson Knox to start this year as like a fringe tight end 1, tight end 2 on a good offense, if that's where hopefully this Dable, offense is going to lead down the line, I could see that. And this is a 4th round guy that probably could still be gotten in most dynasty leagues, probably dirt cheap. So I think he's an interesting guy to maybe think about if you're lacking in a tight end league, or maybe you got an older guy. You just kind of get him, put him on your team. You can play him during the bye week. He's out there enough that he could be one of those 3 for 30 guys. And if he happens to find the end zone, great. You get your 12 points and you're super excited about it. So he's done a good job there. Tyquan Thornton, it's nice to see him be integrated into the offense. I mean, we kind of joked for a while about like Patricia and Joe Judge leading that offense, but they're starting to figure some things out, whether it's those two, whether it's Belichick taking a more hands-on approach. I mean, they have Bailey Zappi winning football games. They have the run game going. And then Tyquan Thornton comes back. They get him 3 touches in the ground, in terms of manufacturing touches there. We know he's an explosive vertical player. Greg Cosell loved Tyquan Thornton. He liked him more than Chris Olave. And Greg Cosell is not just out there making like proclamations, to try to stir attention. Like, he could care less about that. Like, he just goes what he sees on the film. And there was other people that really liked Tyquan Thornton a lot too. So this is a guy that had some people who really liked their game. The Patriots are starving for an outside wide receiver to develop there. So I think Tyquan Thornton is a really interesting dynasty stash, or even a guy get now before he has more of a bigger role in that offense. Because I do think we always make fun of the Patriots and their lack of drafting at the wide receiver position, but they obviously did really like him where they took him, right? They took him pretty high in that, pretty high in terms of where wide receivers were going. So I'm intrigued by Thornton. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, obviously we've talked about him a lot here, but some of it's out of necessity. But right now, the passing game, he's going to be the integral part of it unless Kadarius Toney could actually get on the football field. And even that, like, I think once he's fully acclimated and, playing 80% of the snaps, which I think that'll be maybe as soon as this week, he's going to see a lot of targets, and then they'll start expanding upon that, adding the jet sweeps, adding some of the offensive wrinkles. You're going to see some Saquon Wildcat with Wan'Dale in the backfield. There's already been some whispers that they have a package with those 2 guys. We know my take on Wan'Dale. It was nice to see him get back out there. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, right? I said, go get Wan'Dale now if you can get him in any of your leagues, because the Giants are hurting at wide receiver, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And right now, they do as good of a job as anybody scheming and manufacturing things for offensive players. I don't think that's going to go away with the Kafka Dable, pairing. And I think Wan'Dale is going to be the recipient of a lot of those easy looks after the catch plays, and we're going to see it actually materialize to maybe some legit fantasy production for this surprising Giants team.
Yeah, I mean, I think Wan'Dale, I don't know if he'll be up there at 80% as soon as this weekend, because it did look like he, had a little bit of rust he was knocking off. I think he dropped a big, kind of an easy pass right into his kind of face mask. So I think it's just going to be, I want to see him take the steps that we saw all of these other rookie wide receivers take. He's a little bit behind him, about a month, but due to injury, but there's no doubt that opportunity's there for him to take. And I think he will be an integral part of that offense sooner rather than later. And just as far as Tyquan Thornton goes, well, it was great to see him integrated in, and we made fun of New England a lot this offseason. And I think part of it was trying to install a zone scheme for an offensive line that's run cap super effectively and cap runners. Which I think, maybe we'll just transition that to the dynasty stock report, with Ramondre Stevenson having a huge game, 19 for 75 and 2. But New England has figured it out. They've gone to what works, right? Like they experimented, they tried a couple things, and they've picked what works, they've cut what doesn't, and they look like a pretty well-oiled team. Nobody's out there as a superstar, but everybody's doing their role effectively, exactly how they need to do it, and that's Patriots football. Ramondre is, the backfield right now. I mean, Harris is hurt. Harris is a good back. Harris will be back sooner than later. We just talked about Kenneth Walker being a potentially top 10, 15 dynasty running back. It sounds like, that might be in your thoughts as well. Why don't we talk Ramondre before we discuss a couple 2020 class players?
Yeah, I think Ramondre is not. Listen, part of the thing that'll hold people back from ranking Ramondre high is the thought that New England will bring somebody else in to replace Damian Harris, and I get that. They might well do that. I'm not going to sit here and say Ramondre Stevenson is going to, be a legit bell cow like the Giants use Tyquan right now, or pick another running back but that might also not be needed to be a legitimate top 15 running back, right? He's obviously capable in the passing game. Like right now, he's literally the guy who is their best pass catching running back. And we know he's a good between the tackles runner. He can kick it outside. So he's capable of playing on all three downs. I don't see a scenario where Damian Harris is back on that team next year. They drafted multiple running backs last year. They have Ramondre Stevenson. They'll use that money and assets to go to, for other positions. So if you look at it, I think Ramondre Stevenson, for 2 more years on his rookie deal, I think he's going to be the guy there. They'll mix somebody else in. Maybe next year it's Pierre Strong a little bit. Maybe it's somebody else. But they probably will go with what they have on their roster for the most part, just without Damian Harris. And they have a good offensive line. They have a good scheme. And Ramondre is a good player that just wasn't heavily utilized in college, but had a lot of people with Lance Zierlein. A lot of people thought he had day 2 draft capital. Like they really liked him. So what we're seeing out of him, he deserves to be like, we have all these guys that theoretically we want to believe are better dynasty assets, like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, James Conner, Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, some of these are older, but like Ramondre Stevenson should be ahead of all these guys. Like once I update, my ranks, Ramondre Stevenson's going way up there for me because we're going to see Damian Harris is probably going to miss a decent amount of time here. Ramondre is going to be an RB2, I think, when the dust settles this year for sure, and we'll see if how high he goes. And then I think we're locked into a guy who next year, when redraft season comes around and stuff, he's going to be a guy that's drafted as like a RB 15 to RB 17 type range. So I think that's kind of where we're looking at for him. I don't see that really shifting. I think he's a talented player in a team that has a good old line, likes to run the ball. I wouldn't be overly worried about them bringing another guy. And yeah, they'll use somebody else, but Ramondre has 3-down capabilities. That's the thing that we like to see. It's not like they're going to pull him off the field on every 3rd down. They might like another guy, but just like we think Kenneth Walker can play on 3 downs, Ramondre Stevenson's already showed he can play on 3 downs. So I think that keeps him as a really interesting guy. And I don't think he's being valued correctly yet in the dynasty scope of things, because I think people always have this little stigma about New England running backs. And I think it might be a smart owner might be able to try to take advantage of people thinking that the New England backfield is always going to be a little bit of a quagmire, a little bit of a mess, and might be able to get him a little bit less than maybe what his value should be.
Well, like let's looking at my rankings, how to update them in real time, and this is kind of how I think about things. Ramondre, even if he's got the backfield to himself next year, or maybe there's Pierre Strong, or it's going to be a 1-2 year thing, right? We're not talking about a window like we saw Nick Chubb carry for Cleveland, right? Or Saquon in New York, and we're talking kind of short-term windows here. And with that in mind, there's guys who I still think have a couple year windows of production left. You've got those Austin Ecklers, right? You've got the Aaron Jones out there. There's Josh Jacobs, who I really like, and David Montgomery, who profile as free agents who can actually lead a backfield, maybe not split it. And then you kind of go into a tier of players where it's AJ Dillon, James Robinson, Travis Etienne, Kareem Hunt. These are guys that, they're playing roles in their offense extremely well, maybe sharing a little bit, depending on how well that team is playing and who they're playing. Like, I think in that realm is about where they slot. And hey, I'm AJ Dillon is everybody's darling this offseason, right? Travis Etienne is somebody people drafted with a first round pick who's, I still think, in a quagmire with James Robinson, right? Kareem Hunt, right? He's an extremely talented player. He just, has another committee guy along with him. That's kind of, I think, the realm of where I see Ramondre Stevenson. I don't know if and there's tons of guys that are, have been kind of ahead of him going into the year. The Antonio Gibsons, like you said, the Leonard Fournette's going to drop off. James Conner's going to drop off. Cam Akers is gone, right? Like, all of those players, are going to be dropping behind them too. I don't know if there's anything else you want to do a final conclusion, or, I can roll us to the 2020 class too.
No, I mean, the one thing I'll say is I think some of those guys you talked about, yeah, I'd still prefer Aaron Jones, but I'm not sure I'd prefer AJ Dillon anymore to Ramondre Stevenson. I'm not sure. I definitely would prefer Ramondre over David Montgomery, but I've just never been a huge Montgomery guy. I think he's going to be on a new team. I'm not sure he's ever going to see the workhorse role that he saw in Chicago. I would take my chances with Stevenson for 2 more years in New England than Montgomery at an unknown situation. I love Tony Pollard, but are the Cowboys fully going to give him the role that I want? Maybe not.
No.
Maybe he's going to leave and go somewhere else and get that role. So I would right now, as much as I like Pollard, I'd have Ramondre over him.
Mm-hmm.
To me, Connor's a no-brainer. Definitely Ramondre over him. Now, listen, once we get the new infusion of next year's class, it's hard to keep him probably in that 15 or 16 range. I would prefer Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs is one of the most underrated running backs in the league. I love that he's finally getting the attention that he deserves, and they're finally using him as the guy who warranted going in round 1 of the NFL draft that year, that he's going to put them in a really tough spot of they declined this 50-year option. What is Vegas going to do about him? But I would put Josh Jacobs ahead of him, but some of those other guys, I think I would slot in Ramondre over them, unless things,
Jacobs is playing out of his mind, right?
Yeah.
And just to give a little bit of context of like where that is as far as numbers go, right? Jones is sitting at, 16 for me, right behind my tier 2 of, trailed by Kenneth Walker. AJ Dillon, take or not, but Josh Jacobs, he's kind of sitting at 19. Maybe he bumps up, he's 17, right? And okay, so maybe a guy like Derrick Henry, who's above him, falls out due to age, but we're going to have Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs and everybody coming in over him too. So he's going to be that, mid-high 20s kind of thing, maybe low 20s, when it's all said and done. But that's about where where he'll about settle in for me, I think, for the next 2 or 3 years. Let me transition to us, because we're talking about shuffling rankings, and there's a lot of shuffling to do, right? One of the other guys that I think I have a pretty optimistic viewpoint on about his talent is J.K. Dobbins, but here he is, he's working his way back, and he's out of the game because his knee stiffened up on the turf. CEH is there, and Edwards-Helaire was, everybody was pretty excited about starting him. He was always scoring touchdown. He was getting him 20 fantasy points. And once those TDs evaporated, right? Once he stopped scoring touchdowns, he's leaving a massive hole in your starting lineup. He's getting 9 carries for, a handful of yards and nothing through the passing game. And then Cam Akers just out. I mean, in a week, right? Like, I have always thought Henderson was still potentially the better back, but maybe not the one with the most upside for the Rams. And I think even Sean McVay was somewhat committed to trying to get Akers to work for them in that offense. I mean, just the past week, he had all 13 carries for the Rams on the ground. Henderson had nothing. He had no carries on the ground. He had a couple targets and catches. And then just bombshell this weekend where, Akers is inactive, not at practice, not active for the game. He's on his way out. We have no idea what's going on. What is this personal thing? Is he upset with the team's utilization of him? I'm not sure, because he got all the work the week before. Where do we even put him? It's this big shuffling of, and it's a reminder too. Like, we can be really excited about this upcoming 2023 class. We were, and even for a while, for a year or two, that 2020 class looked phenomenal. Those first 2 years, they were hot commodities, trying to get your hands on J.K. Dobbins, trying to get your hands on, Edwards-Helaire. And honestly, like, from that expectations, when we're looking at it like 2 to 3 years later, it's kind of disappointed. And I don't know that you could look at any of these players and be really excited about what their outlook is moving forward. I'm still burning a candle for J.K. Dobbins. It makes me really sad to talk about him in a negative fashion, because I think his play style was one that I was absolutely in love with him as a runner coming out. But the reality is a reality that he's not doing that on the field right now. And players like Kenneth Walker are, right? Players like Ramondre are. So Paul, like, what do we make of sort of the scraps of this 2020 class, that they're shorn in tatters, and this once perfect, it's like
thank God we still got DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor. So
I know,
it's not like
right?
a complete lost cause.
I'm sitting here with like my duvet, and it's this perfect white, awesome duvet, and it just like looks so good. And then the dog comes, sleeps on it, and then it's all this hair, and it's kind of like torn in little places, and it's all lumpy now. And goodness, I mean, that's the 2020 class. Is this sort of 3-year-old duvet that needs an upgrade?
Yeah, and here's the thing. I love J.K. Dobbins. That year, DeAndre Swift was my 1, and J.K. Dobbins was my 2 before Jonathan Taylor came into the picture as my number 3. But here's the thing that, we just talked about Ramondre. For me, Ramondre's got to be ahead of all 3 of these guys. And the reason for it is we know what I think Ramondre's role is going to be. We don't know if Dobbins is ever going to get back to that player. Like, he had one of those where it wasn't just the ACL. It wasn't just clean. It was other stuff, right? And we see guys come back from ACLs really fast now. When he wasn't back for preseason, when he wasn't back for week 1 and week 2, and then he was on like this snap count, and now the knee was, kind of like flared up on him yesterday or whatever. We have to realize these contracts for these second round guys, it's only 4 years. J.K. Dobbins is going into his last year of his contract next year. Would we be surprised if the Ravens, who have had no run game the last 2 years besides Lamar, don't invest in one of these fun backs, even if it's in day 2, Blake Corum, right? Those type of guys.
Well, Gus Edwards is coming back too. What, like, are we going to see a situation where, like Henderson in LA, who was out producing Akers, this guy that's kind of been left for dead and forgotten, James Robinson to the Travis Etienne in drafts this year, are we going to see Gus Edwards be out producing J.K. Dobbins?
Yeah, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for the rest of this year. And then you're talking about him going into his final year, and they're definitely not going to re-sign him before the year starts, right? So then, unless he was unbelievable in his 4th year, then maybe they'd consider it. But the truth of the matter is, he's had a lot of injuries. It's a position that people are very hesitant to give second contracts to, especially to injured players. They could go get somebody else. It's a loaded group. That might come as soon as this draft class, not wait till he's no longer with the team. So there's so many paths where Dobbins is the one that I felt best about, like 6 weeks ago. But there's so many paths where Dobbins never materializes into the player that we thought he could after that first year. I don't think Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I don't think the Chiefs are going to pick up his 5th-year option. So just like, and I don't think he's going to have this tremendous year like Josh Jacobs is having next year. That's going to force the issue. I just don't think that's the player he is. And who was the other one? Oh, and Cam Akers. I mean, whether it's the injury, whether some other stuff's going on, like, he doesn't look like the explosive player that we saw a couple years ago. And is he really going to fall into a situation that is that's going to ask him to be the lead guy? Not really sure. So all of those guys would have been far and away over every New England running back prior to the season started. And now I don't see a scenario where, if people are being honest with themselves and taking out the allure of how much we liked them a couple years ago, how anybody really could put CEH, Cam Akers or J.K. Dobbins ahead of a guy like Ramondre, who's been healthy, who's producing, who probably has the New England job for the next 2 years, as least the lead of that job. And running backs, should we really be thinking more than 2 to 3 years? I mean, I don't even know if 3 years should be in play. It almost should be almost 2 years, right? Because it's just, these things just change so dramatically and so quick at the running back position. And we've seen these guys go from darlings that we all wanted on our team to guys now that don't have a lot of value in terms of dynasty right now. And hopefully somebody can turn it around. I'm hoping it's still Dobbins. Maybe Akers can go somewhere else and get a fresh start, and he can find his way. And maybe we'll eventually see Clyde Edwards-Helaire, live up to potential. But I think any of those scenarios, it's more unlikely than it is likely that we see any of those things happen. And I don't think anybody would have thought that, as excited as we were about that not that long ago in the dynasty community.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up? I know you've got the plague going through the house, and I'm sure the dog to walk and all the chores to do, and an end of a Monday Night Football to catch. Anything? Any final parting thoughts for us, Paul?
No, I think we did a good job there talking about the running backs a little bit, reshuffling the ranks. I'm hoping to get in there again. I know I had updated them last week, but there's still things I wanted to tinker, especially looking at the running back position, kind of as we talked through on here a little bit. And keeping up with dynasty ranks is tricky, because I do feel like 1 week in the NFL, you could feel like you could make wholesale changes from 1 week to the next, which is not really ideally how you should be doing it. But so much, I feel like, impacts and changes things so quickly, that you are basing it a lot on situation and stuff like that, more than like when we're just doing the draft eligible ranks. It's just like, okay, watch the film, who's the guy with the best traits you think could translate. It's a little bit different when you're talking dynasty rankings, but it's fun to do this. It keeps us, keeping those ranks up to date. I think it's fun talking it over. People love, interacting on Twitter with that stuff. So please, any dynasty related questions, do not hesitate. Reach out to Jeff or I on Twitter. Love to talk to you about that. If you're enjoying what we're doing here, please get over to the website. SS Football is the quickest and fastest way to get there. Check out the premium content tab. And for $9.99, you get access to all of our premium notebooks, the draft, the scouting notebook, the rankings notebook with all our different style rankings. The scouting notebook has all our scouting profiles. And then obviously in April, the draft projections notebook as well. Jeff, any final thoughts on your end before we close it up?
No, I just, I look back at my rankings. I think I had them up as we talked. They're 2 weeks old and they already look like trash.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's what
you're
I'm
gonna
saying.
have
Like,
to
it's almost like every like 7 to 10 days, like you could
spend
do
some time again this
major
week.
updates.
I
It's
know.
wild. And we'll continue to do that for people who are subscribers to the premium notebooks. You will see those changes shortly
Well,
in those as
yeah.
well.
One final thought. Just nothing with players or draft or anything like that. But from an NFL perspective, I mean, this year, like I said, it was a topsy-turvy weekend, right? I mean, we had the Jets win, the Giants won, the Falcons won, the Seahawks beat the Cardinals. Like all of these teams that we thought, might be terrible are showing up to play, and the parity in the NFL is right now is just it's really exciting. I mean, to me, that's the storyline of the season so far. Not something like Kansas City Buffalo, which was a great game and all, but I think the parity in the NFL is stealing headlines right now, and it's got me super excited. Just to see how the rest of this season plays out. I think it's one where fans are so tempted to react on a week to week basis, and if you do that, you'll lose your sanity this year. You just have to take a patient approach. Same thing with the 49ers. I'm saying, like, they lost to Atlanta, but it's really about who's who survives through the first, half of the year, and how well they start playing in the second half of the year. That's going to be, what really starts differentiating. And that's what, we see good teams do that. We see bad teams fail to do that. And coaching is a big part of it. And it, credit for the Giants, like, seems like they've got a great coach to lead them through. They're going to be legit all year.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, who would have thought the Rams and the Bucks would be where they are, and the Giants, as one team, be where they are. And you mentioned San Francisco and Atlanta. Like, Atlanta's played pretty good this year. They could even have more wins than they have, and they're doing it with a little smoke and mirrors too. Trying to maximize the most out of Mariota. Heavy run game. Like, they haven't really gotten the best out of Kyle Pitts yet. Drake London had a couple good moments, but it's not like he's dominating just yet in that offense. So.
Well, it's not crazy. There's like these two high shells, right? That's your base defense now. And what is Atlanta doing? They're running the crap out of the ball. What is Seattle doing? They're running the ball. What is New York doing? Like, they're barely passing the ball. They don't have any receivers to throw to, right? Like, I don't know. It has just created, as teams have geared up to stop the top offenses, the top teams in the league. All of these other, the Atlantas of the world, the Houstons with Dameon Pierce, have been able to come and step to the plate and say, hey, this is how we're built. We don't have a quarterback that's going to sling it, so we're going to bully the ball. And teams aren't adjusting to that. It's fascinating. Like San Francisco isn't adjusting to, Atlanta's. They don't have the personnel. Like, San Francisco's injured, right, all over the place. But even then, San Francisco has the better roster, and they didn't step up to be able to play that game, right? And they don't, teams don't have, they're formulating the answer for Buffalo, for KC, and Green Bay, right? Like, they're formulating the answer to Green Bay, and we're seeing Green Bay fail to be able to do anything with it. And and then these other teams are just able to kind of take advantage to say, hey, here's our spot. Let's steal some wins. Let's build a program. Let's get some momentum. I don't know.
It's fun. It's fun because the uncertainty is why at times we love college football, right? Because we can go in and Tennessee can knock off Alabama and Utah can beat USC, right? And we could have these great games, and we're seeing some of these unexpectedness. Like, no one expected Atlanta to beat San Francisco this week. Nobody expected Tampa Bay to lose to Pittsburgh, right? Nobody expected the Giants to beat Baltimore. And like, these things are happening more in the NFL now, and it makes for a fun product for sure. And it's fun to talk about it here each and every week with you, as always. So, on behalf of Jeff, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.